Some stories burn so brightly they blind you. A flash of lightning across a dark sky, so brilliant and so brief that once it's gone, you're left wondering if you ever really saw it at all. In the wild revolutionary year of 1968, a firecracker of a woman from a tiny Texas town did just that. She walked into a recording studio, sang a song about small-town hypocrisy, and in 3 minutes and 12 seconds became one of the most famous people on the planet. Her name was Jeannie C. and her song, Harper Valley PTA, wasn't just a hit. It was a cultural atom bomb. It sold millions of copies, topped both the country and pop charts, and turned a feisty, mini-skirted young mother into an overnight icon of rebellion. She was the talk of every town, the face on every magazine, the woman who gave a voice to anyone who'd ever felt judged or looked down upon. But then, the light began to fade. The roar of the crowd softened to a whisper, and then, for many, to silence. What happens when the song ends? What happens when the person the world thinks you are is a stranger to the person you see in the mirror? This isn't just the story of a one-hit wonder. It's the story of a woman who flew too close to the sun and who had to crash back to earth to find out who she truly was. It's a story of fame, heartbreak, and a desperate search for grace. A story far more dramatic and far more human than any song she ever sang. This is the untold story of Jeannie C. and the life she fought to reclaim after the music stopped. To understand the explosion of Harper Valley PTA, you have to feel the air of the late 1960s. America was a pressure cooker. The Vietnam War raged overseas, while at home, a cultural war was being fought on every street corner. It was a battle between generations, between old traditions and new freedoms. For women, the ground was shifting beneath their feet. The prim and proper image of the 1950s housewife was being shattered by the sexual revolution and the rise of feminism. The miniskirt, which Jeannie C. would later make her signature, wasn't just a piece of clothing, it was a defiant statement. Country music, the soundtrack of rural and blue-collar America, was also in the midst of its own identity crisis. The Nashville sound was often polished, polite, and conservative. Its female stars, like Patsy Cline and Loretta Lynn, were immensely talented, but they generally sang of heartache and devotion from within a traditional framework. They were relatable but rarely revolutionary. Into this simmering pot of change walked Jean Carolyn Stevenson, a young woman from Anson, Texas, a town where everyone knew everyone else's business, the very kind of place her famous song would later skewer. From a young age, Jeannie was a dreamer. She wasn't content with the expected path of marriage, kids, and a quiet life. She listened to the Grand Ole Opry on the radio and saw a world of glamour and excitement far beyond the cotton fields of West Texas. She had a powerful voice and an even more powerful ambition. She married her high school sweetheart, Mickey Riley, right after graduation. Soon after, their daughter, Kim, was born. On the surface, it was a typical start to a small-town life. But Jeannie's dreams were restless. She worked as a secretary and a shoe model, but her heart was in Nashville. She and Mickey talked about it, dreamed about it, and finally, they made the leap. They packed their lives into a car and drove to Music City in 1966, chasing a fantasy. Nashville, however, was a tough town to crack. It was a city of gatekeepers where you had to know the right people and play the right game. For 2 years, Jeannie struggled. She worked as a demo singer, recording rough versions of songs for songwriters to pitch to bigger stars. It was anonymous, often thankless work. She'd pour her heart into a song, only to hear it later on the radio sung by a famous voice. She was close to the dream, but always on the outside looking in. Her marriage to Mickey was already showing signs of strain under the pressure. They were young, broke, and far from home. The dream was starting to feel like a mirage, and the thought of packing up and returning to Texas in defeat was a constant, humiliating fear. It was during this period of desperation on the verge of giving up that a songwriter named Tom T. Hall wrote a little story song inspired by a woman from his own childhood. It was a quirky, funny, and deeply cynical tale. Its name was Harper Valley PTA. The song was a hot potato. Several established artists, including Skeeter Davis, were offered it and turned it down. It was too controversial, too pointed. It called out pillars of the community, the church, the school board, for their hypocrisy. In the conservative world of Nashville, it was risky. But for Shelby Singleton, a maverick producer who had just started his own label, Plantation Records, risk was an opportunity. He heard the demo, sung by Jeannie herself, and he didn't just hear a song, he heard a star. He called Jeannie in for a meeting. By this point, she was at her wit's end. Her husband, Mickey, had already moved back to Texas, convinced her music career was a lost cause. Jeannie was about to follow him. When Singleton offered her the chance to record Harper Valley PTA, it felt like a final desperate roll of the dice. But there was a catch. Singleton didn't just want her voice. He wanted an image. He saw the fire in her, and he wanted to market it. He envisioned her as a modern, sexy, miniskirt-wearing rebel, the embodiment of the song's sassy protagonist. This was a far cry from the modest, church-going woman from Anson, but she was hungry, and she said yes. The recording session on July 26, 1968, has become the stuff of legend. Jeannie, riddled with insecurity and a head cold, wasn't sure she could deliver the performance Singleton wanted. The story goes that he coached her, line by line, pushing her to inject more attitude, more sock-it-to-'em fire into her delivery. She sang with the raw energy of a woman who had nothing left to lose. When they finished, everyone in the studio knew they had captured something special. What they didn't know was that they had just created a phenomenon. The rise of Harper Valley PTA was dizzyingly fast. Singleton, a master promoter, rushed the single to radio stations. Within a week, it had sold over 1 million copies. Within a month, it was the #1 song in America, not just on the country charts, but on the Billboard Hot 100 pop chart as well. It was a crossover smash of unprecedented scale. Jeannie C. Riley went from being an unknown demo singer to a household name, seemingly overnight. The world was enthralled. Here was this beautiful, fiery woman dressed in go-go boots and a miniskirt, singing a song that thumbed its nose at the establishment. She was an instant feminist icon, a symbol of liberation for women who felt trapped by small-town gossip and double standards. The song's protagonist, Mrs. Johnson, who marches into the PTA meeting to expose everyone's dirty little secrets, became a folk hero, and Jeannie C. Riley became her living embodiment. Fame hit her like a tidal wave. She won a Grammy for Best Female Country Vocal Performance. She hosted her own television specials. A movie based on the song was rushed into production. Her face was everywhere. But behind the scenes, a different story was unfolding. The image of the Harper Valley rebel was just that, an image, and the real Jeannie was starting to get lost inside it. One of the most revealing and rarely discussed incidents from this time happened during a photo shoot. The label wanted to capitalize on her sexy new persona. They dressed her in an outfit she found revealing and uncomfortable. She felt less like a singer and more like a product being packaged for sale. She later recalled the profound sense of dislocation, looking at her own reflection and not recognizing the person staring back. "That's not me," she thought. "Who is that?" It was a private moment of crisis that hinted at the deep conflict brewing within her. She was playing a role, and the applause was deafening, but the person she was pretending to be felt like a betrayal of the woman she was raised to be. This internal war would come to define the next chapter of her life. The whirlwind of fame was intoxicating, but it was also deeply corrosive. Jeannie C. Riley, the person, was drowning in the persona of Jeannie C. Riley, the star. Her marriage, which had been fragile to begin with, completely fractured under the strain. She and Mickey reconciled briefly after her success, but the pressures were too great. The constant touring, the demands of the label, and the hangers-on who suddenly surrounded them created a toxic environment. Their relationship became a cycle of bitter fights, separations, and reconciliations. Jeannie was living a paradox. On stage, she was the embodiment of female empowerment. Off stage, she felt powerless. She was a product, meticulously managed by her label. Shelby Singleton, the man who had discovered her, now controlled nearly every aspect of her career. He dictated what she wore, what she sang, and how she presented herself to the world. She recorded follow-up songs that tried to recapture the Harper Valley magic, like The Girl Most Likely and Things Go Better with Love. But they were shadows of the original. She felt trapped, a caricature of her one big hit. To cope with the immense pressure and growing unhappiness, Jeannie turned to alcohol. It was a way to numb the anxiety, to quiet the voice in her head that screamed about the disconnect between her public image and her private reality. Her drinking escalated, leading to missed shows and erratic behavior. She also battled deep bouts of depression. In interviews years later, she spoke with startling honesty about this dark period. She described feeling a profound emptiness, a spiritual void that no amount of fame, money, or applause could fill. One of the most poignant and little-known facts from this era is a quote from a diary she kept. She wrote, "I am the loneliest person I know." Think about that. Here was a woman adored by millions, whose song was a global anthem, and yet she felt utterly, desperately alone. It's a heartbreaking insight into the isolating nature of celebrity. The world saw a sassy, confident star. She saw a lost and broken woman. Her relationship with the very song that made her famous grew complicated, then resentful. For years she couldn't escape it. Every audience demanded it. Every interviewer asked about it. Harper Valley PTA became a golden cage. She felt it overshadowed all her other work and locked her into a persona she no longer wanted to inhabit. There were nights she would stand backstage, hearing her introduction, and feel a wave of dread at the thought of having to go out and sing that song one more time. The breaking point was a slow, agonizing crumble rather than a single event. It was the accumulation of years of feeling exploited by the industry, of struggling with her personal demons, and of a growing spiritual hunger. She began to realize that the life she was living, the life of a country music superstar, was not making her happy. In fact, it was destroying her. She needed a way out, but she had no idea how to find it. The central controversy of Jeannie C. Riley's life wasn't a scandal in the typical celebrity sense. It was an internal spiritual war that eventually spilled out into the public eye. The conflict was between the sexy, miniskirted, sock-it-to-'em rebel she was marketed as and the deeply traditional religious woman she was at her core. From the beginning, she was uncomfortable with the sex symbol image. She had been raised in the conservative Southern Baptist tradition where modesty and piety were cherished virtues. Being pushed onto a stage in what many considered scandalous attire felt like a betrayal of her upbringing. In a 2008 interview, she said something incredibly revealing. "I was a Christian, and I was a sinner. I was living a life that was totally against what I believed in." This wasn't just a career, it was a crisis of faith. She felt she was leading her fans astray, presenting an image of liberation that, for her, felt like a form of bondage. This created a deep and unsettling debate around her. Was she a hypocrite, or was she a victim of an exploitative industry? The answer, like most things in life, is complex. The Nashville machine of the 1960s and 70s was notorious for packaging and controlling its artists, especially its female stars. Shelby Singleton was a brilliant but notoriously tough businessman. He had a vision for Jeannie C. Riley, and he executed it flawlessly from a commercial standpoint. He made her a star. But in the process, he may have overlooked the needs of the woman herself. In the mid-1970s, this internal conflict reached its climax. After years of struggling with depression and alcoholism, Jeannie hit rock bottom. Her marriage to Mickey had ended in divorce. Her career was stalling. She felt spiritually bankrupt. It was at this lowest point that she found a lifeline. In 1976, she embraced a born-again Christian faith. This conversion was not a quiet, private affair. It was a radical, life-altering transformation that she felt compelled to share with the world. And it put her on a direct collision course with her own career. She publicly renounced her past. She denounced the sexy image she had projected. Most shockingly, she began to speak out against her own signature song, Harper Valley PTA. She declared that she no longer wanted to sing it, viewing it as a song that promoted gossip and unchristian values. This was commercial suicide, and she knew it. She was turning her back on the very thing that made her famous. She recorded gospel albums like From Harper Valley to the Mountaintop, and began speaking and singing in churches instead of concert halls. She wrote an autobiography titled The Same, which detailed her struggles and her newfound faith with raw honesty. The reaction from the country music establishment and many of her fans was one of bewilderment. They had loved the rebel. This new pious Jeannie was someone they didn't recognize. Some saw her conversion as a genuine cry for help and a brave act of self-preservation. Others were more cynical, viewing it as a publicity stunt or the act of a woman who couldn't handle the pressures of fame. The historical debate remains. Was her rejection of her past a necessary act of reclaiming her soul, or was it a tragic rejection of the feminist power her fans had seen in her? Perhaps the most truthful view is that it was both. It was a messy, public, but ultimately deeply personal journey to reconcile the warring parts of her own identity. The long-term consequences of Jeannie C. Riley's flash of fame and subsequent retreat are profound, both for her personally and for the culture at large. Her story serves as a powerful cautionary tale about the true cost of celebrity. She achieved the dream that so many chase, instant, global recognition, only to find it was a nightmare in disguise. Her journey highlights the immense pressure placed on artists, especially women, to conform to a marketable image, often at the expense of their own well-being and artistic integrity. The historical significance of Harper Valley PTA itself cannot be overstated. It was more than just a novelty song. It was a cultural touchstone. It cracked open the door for a new kind of storytelling in country music, one that was more direct, more satirical, and more willing to critique social norms. It paved the way for future artists from Tanya Tucker to Miranda Lambert, who would build careers on an attitude of fearless, unapologetic womanhood. The song gave a voice to millions of women who felt unseen and unheard, and that impact is permanent. But Jeannie's personal story has its own, quieter legacy. By publicly walking away from the Nashville machine and renouncing the persona that made her a star, she made a radical statement about personal peace over professional success. She chose her soul over stardom. In an industry that often demands conformity, her rebellion wasn't the miniskirt. It was her decision to leave the party altogether. What can we learn from her life? We learn that the shiny veneer of fame often hides deep human suffering. We learn that authenticity, while a difficult path, is often the only one that leads to true contentment. Her life forces us to look beyond the one-hit wonder label and see the complex human being behind the hit. She wasn't just the Harper Valley girl. She was a wife, a mother, and a woman of faith struggling to find her place in a world that wanted to put her in a box. Today, her life has found a quiet equilibrium. After her conversion, she eventually reconciled with Mickey Riley, and they remarried, finding us a stability that had eluded them in their youth. Though she has largely remained out of the public spotlight, she has, on occasion, returned to the stage, even making peace with her most famous song. She learned to see Harper Valley PTA not as a curse, but as a gift that, for all its complications, opened a door and gave her a platform. She sings it now, not as the sassy rebel of 1968, but as a woman who has lived a full, complicated life and has found a measure of grace on the other side of the storm. Her story still matters because it's a timeless reminder that the most important journey is not the one to the top of the charts, but the one back to ourselves. So what do we make of a life like Jeannie C. Riley's? It's a story of contradictions, a symbol of rebellion who craved tradition, a public figure who sought private peace, a star who walked away from the spotlight to find the light within. Her journey wasn't neat or tidy. It was messy, painful, and profoundly human. She flew higher than most of us could ever imagine, propelled by one unforgettable song. And when the altitude became unbearable, when the air got too thin, she had the courage to come back down to earth. She gave up the image the world loved to save the woman she knew she had to be. In the end, the most powerful story Jeannie C. Riley ever told wasn't about the hypocrites in Harper Valley. It was her own. It's a story that reminds us that our true worth is not measured in gold records or screaming fans, but in the quiet, hard-won peace we find within our own hearts. She was the woman who sang about socking it to the PTA, but her greatest act of defiance was reclaiming her own life. And that is a story worth remembering long after the music fades.